morning, and welcome to the virtual Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lake Norman. Our fellowship walks diverse paths to find meaning and purpose, but we are united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all, and the obligation to express our faith through acts of justice and compassion. We are an open and inclusive liberal faith community. All are welcome here, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, or economic status. My name is Harvey Wigter, and I have been an active member of this congregation for 2 years, and am now honored to serve as its vice president. I'm going to use this repurposed Hanukkah candle. There it is. To light the chalice. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just, and in justice, may we be loving. I am pleased to introduce our speaker, my teacher and friend from Davidson University. We are so grateful he is with us today. In the message, I told you that he's a graduate of the University of Chicago and got his MA and PhD from Harvard. He's had all kinds of honors, including being a top teacher several times at Davidson College. This morning, and he's just a wonderful, warm, open, erudite, knowledgeable, helpful teacher. This morning, Scott will be talking about language and responsibility, Paul Celan, and poems after Auschwitz. I'm going to start with a brief opening word. This is from the Basic Law of the Federal Republic of Germany. That's their constitution. Human dignity shall be inviolable. To respect and protect it shall be the duty of all state authority. And now I turn it over to Professor Scott Denham.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Denham. My friend Harvey, who is in my Davidson Learns course, asked me if I would be willing to say something to the Unitarians here about the notion of post-war German reconciliation. I study Germany and German literature and history and archives and museums, and teach at Davidson College and also in the humanities program. And I've spent a lot of my time thinking about how to represent trauma and loss in the Central European context. And so that's a big topic that Harvey asked me to speak about. And his words, I think, were, what about German guilt and reconciliation? So I want to open with a little bit of a political speech by a former president of Germany, Richard von Weizsäcker. And then I want to turn to the poetry of Paul Celan, who is one of my favorite writers. This is Paul Celan. These are his poems in the fancy German edition. But first, what about German guilt? The idea of collective guilt is a problematic one that doesn't really hold for most people upon close examination. And Richard von Weizsäcker was a politician and a diplomat. During the war, he was a young officer, and his father was the ambassador to the Vatican, to the Holy See, and was tried for war crimes after the war as being party to the deportation and murder of Jews in Italy. And Richard Weizsäcker, as a young lawyer, defended his father at that trial. So that's a bit of context. Weizsäcker, then, he's a Christian Democrat, so center-right conservative, serves as in many political roles over the years, and then ultimately becomes the federal president, who is the head of state and not the head of government. The chancellor is the head of government. And Weizsäcker, as the head of state, has duties to carry out rituals and performances and state functions that represent the people. One of the important annual duties of the head of state, the Bundespräsident, is to speak at certain memorial occasions. And the 8th of May, the end of the war in Europe, the German capitulation in 1945 was one of such occasions. And at the 40th anniversary of the 8th of May speech, the 8th of May event where Weizsäcker spoke, he radically changed the public discourse about guilt and responsibility in Germany. And he says, first of all, he names the 8th of May, 1945 as a day of liberation, which is a radical move to name unconditional surrender and capitulation for a nation as liberation. And they were liberated in a way, he said, from themselves. In the second part of the speech, he makes a clear differentiation between guilt, which he says is a personal matter between oneself and one's God, and responsibility. And he says responsibility for Germans, people who live in the German nation and are citizens, they have inherited the history of their state and have a responsibility to act in such a way that the Holocaust can never happen again, that colonial expansion can never happen again, and a responsibility to uphold the Constitution, the first article of which says that the dignity of human beings is inviolable, and it is the first state duty to protect that dignity. So in the context of Harvey's questioning me, could I talk about guilt and reconciliation? It's important for me to remember Weizsäcker's moral imperative that Germans have a responsibility to defend human dignity, even if they are not personally responsible for the transgressions and assaults on human dignity that happened in their past, in their families. So there's one way to think about post-war German contexts of guilt and responsibility is in the framing of Weizsäcker as a kind of state duty of citizens. In the context of art, poetic language in this case, how do you write a poem after Auschwitz? So the philosopher Theodor Adorno, a Jewish German philosopher who immigrated, escaped from the Germany to the US and ended up in Los Angeles, wrote in 1947 in an essay that to write a poem after Auschwitz is an act of barbarism. He's misquoted often, and that's become kind of a cliche. And it's polemic, it's hyperbole. But one wonders, in the context of Adorno's charge, how can there be art? How can there be beauty when Auschwitz is now part of everyone's knowledge and experience? Everyone, of course, in the West, in his circles, but it becomes a universal. Of course, the UN the Declaration of Human Rights is a product of Auschwitz. The term genocide is a product of Auschwitz. The the rights claims that rights are universal carries into Adorno's thinking about aesthetics, also claims about an art and beauty, and how can we make a poem when we know about Auschwitz? And Paul Celan, I'm going to share my screen now a little bit and show you some pictures of Paul Celan. Paul Celan grew up in Bukovina, in Chernovitz, which is in Ukraine now. He is Jewish and as at that time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the remnants of that empire after World War I, where urban and administrative centers were still very much German-speaking for German Jews, in the midst of Polish and Ukrainian and Romanian in Bukovina. So he knew Romanian and he knew Yiddish, and his home language is German. Paul Celan's parents were both killed, one in camps. One died of disease and one was shot to death. He himself was in a labor camp. We don't know a whole lot about what he doesn't talk much about that experience, but survives the labor camp, begins studying medicine, goes to Paris, comes back to Romania after the war, and then ends up after the war spending the rest of his life in Paris. He was born in 1920 and he dies by suicide in 1970 by drowning himself in the Seine in Paris. The place of Paul Celan's language, poetic language of German, already being a minority language for him growing up, and being a language surrounded by a place, a territory that's not German, and now that in that space is completely absent, connects for me to a phrase by historian Omer Bartov that he used in describing the ghosts or the palpability of the absence of Jewish people in Germany, which he called the presence of the absence. That's connected for me as I think about Celan's poetry to this language that doesn't have a place, because the place of Eastern European Jewish German that Celan embodies, not unlike that of Kafka, many other Austro-Hungarian and Jewish German writers. The place of that language is no more, and it's really deterritorialized. That's the point about that I want to get across here too, that the presence of the absence in Bartov's sense of talking about no Jews in Germany is analogous to a language that is no longer there in places where it once was. Let's see, I want to let you hear a little bit of Celan. We'll listen to one poem called Fadensonnen. Fathom is connected to Faden or thread, and thread sons. Celan is trying to remake German language after the Nazis. How do you write a poem in German when German has become the language of the murderers? German under the Nazis is a highly bureaucratized language, objectifying, distant. And Celan takes it on this project, not necessarily inspired by Adorno, but Adorno's challenge speaks to that, is how can you make poetry, not only after Auschwitz, but in the language of the murderers. Celan does that in large part, especially in his later poems, by radically challenging syntax and and by creating new words. So we'll listen to this first little poem, and then do that in translation, and then I'll spend the rest of the time looking at a different poem called Tenebrae, the days before Easter in the Christian calendar, which means darkness and sort of ever darkening. And then I'll end with a little bit of Paul Celan's Poetics from a speech he gave when he won a prize in 1961 called the Meridian. So here's Celan.
Fadensonnen über der grauschwarzen Ödnis. Ein baumhoher Gedanke greift sich den Lichtton. Es sind noch Lieder zu singen, jenseits der Menschen.
I love how you can hear him turning the pages, the tactile aspect of his reading. Here's the poem, Thread Suns. Above the gray-black wasteland, a tree-high thought grasps on to light's pitch. There are still songs to be sung on the other side of humanity. So it's not a representative poem. It's not a narrative poem. We have some image, maybe from the idea of tree high, that there's maybe looking upward. The idea maybe that tree branches against the sunlight somehow are connected to a tonal experience. And that there's some kind of break between this side and that side. The wasteland and the other side of humanity, the idea that the poetry, songs to be sung, can happen after the wasteland. But who knows? I mean, it's a difficult thing. Here's a couple of kind of keywords and images and ideas that run through Celan and are present in this poem as well. The idea of tracing and lines. He uses the word Engführung, which is a nautical strait, but also connects to the idea in music in a fugue where the stretto, where the different parts of a fugue come together. This is the point to tell you about Celan's most famous poem, probably, called Death Fugue, which is a quite representative death camp poem that he became known for early on in 1948, 49, 50. By 1952, he really didn't want to have that poem anthologized anymore because he wanted to get past that primary identification of his poetic work as that of the Holocaust poet, which he was not. He was much more than that. But this idea of musical imagery and terminology in the term Engführung and stretto in the Death Fugue poem is an element that shows up other places in his work as well. And the idea of a meridian, a line, a dividing line. So here's a few other ideas about translation here. The tree high thought tunes in to light's pitch or grasps onto light's pitch. This is Michael Hamburger's translation, where he uses tunes in to pitch to emphasize the sonic and musical aspect of that line. The German greifen is very much the cognate in English is to grip or grasp, which doesn't have that sonic or tonal attitude about that word. And then the German word Menschen at the end is grammatically gendered male, but means all people, all human beings. And so these are just an example of the choices that a translator has to make, because the translator is the best reader, right? To translate is to read as well as is possible as an act of interpretation, and ideas of accuracy you can see here are already not useful. Greifen means both to grasp and to tune into and to hold on to all at once. Let's see, another couple of wonderful neologisms that show up in Celan: Atemwende, breath turn, the idea of maybe the moment between breathing in and breathing out, of stillness, is a new word that he invents that we can get our head around in this context. Or Sprachgitter, speech grill or sieve or cover, screen, Sprachgitter. So do we call that, a speech grill? That's how one translator, I'm looking here at some of my translation books. Speech grill doesn't really do it for me in English. That sounds a little odd. Those kinds of translation questions are ones that all readers of Celan in other languages deal with. Let's see. The idea of breathing as I breathe out, as a topos or as a figure for him, is primary, among others. Let's go back to that speech later. I want to look at this poem now, Ténébré. This is Michael Hamburger's. No, this is John Felsteiner's translation. There's a handful of Celan translators. There are hundreds of Celan translators. There are a handful that are just exquisite. So Felsteiner's translation, he uses this word grasp and graspable for greifen, and we see the same word here in the third line in German, gegriffen, and the second line in German, greifbar. That's the same term that is in the first poem I showed you about, to grasp or grip or grab. In Ténébré, the poem of darkening, the darkening days before Easter in the Christian tradition, here the speaker of the poem is speaking to Lord, Herr in German, God, Herr, and telling God to pray to the speaker. Bete zu uns.
Nah sind wir, Herr, nahe und greifbar, gegriffen schon, Herr, ineinander verkrallt, als wär der Leib eines jeden von uns dein Leib, Herr. Bete, Herr, bete zu uns, wir sind nah. Windschief gingen wir hin, uns zu bücken nach Mulde und Maar. Zur Tränke gingen wir, Herr. Es war Blut, es war, was du vergossen, Herr. Es glänzt. Es warf uns dein Bild in die Augen, Herr. Augen und Mund stehen so offen und leer, Herr. Wir haben getrunken, Herr, das Blut und das Bild, das im Blut war, Herr. Bete, Herr, wir sind nah.
So that's his really stunning poem, Darkening, or Ténébré, where the speaker is comforting the Lord and says that we are near. Various religious motifs connected to the obvious Christian tradition, but this is a much bigger poem than that. This is not the Ténébré poem of the Catholic tradition at all. Now I want to turn, we can go back to that. I'll leave that up at the end. I want to turn to some of Celan's poetics, in which he talks about the poem as constantly seeking the reader. You'll recognize some of the topoi and the themes. Nobody can tell how long the breath pause, the testing, and the thought will last. The swift which has been outside has gained speed. The poem knows this, but heads straight for that other, the imagined or ideal reader or listener that it considers reachable, able to be set free, perhaps vacant, and thus turn. This is the breath turn idea. Let's say, like Lucille, who is a character in a Büchner play that is a reference to a literary reference, that's an earlier part of the speech. The idea that the poem is seeking an other, a confrontation, an engagement with a reader. Notice how he speaks about the poem as a living creature. Certainly the poem today shows, and this I believe has to do only indirectly with the not to be underestimated difficulties of word choice, the faster fall of syntax or the more lucid sense for ellipsis. The poem shows unmistakably a strong tendency to fall silent, given all the options. I'm going to turn the page now and move to this paragraph. Let's see, no, this is the bottom of this last page. The poem calls, the next to last line, calls and brings itself in order to be able to exist ceaselessly back from its already no longer and into its always still. So these temporal concepts of already being in a space of no longer present in engaging the other and always still engaging the other. The always still can only be a speaking, but not just language as such, nor presumably just verbal analogy either, but language actualized, set free under the sign of a radical individuation that at the same time, however, remains mindful of the borders language draws and of the possibilities language opens up for it. So the speaking out, the engagement, this always still, the poem is always ever present and seeking a listener to make sense, to make meaning, to understand. Let's go down a little bit. The poem is lonely. It is lonely and it is en route. It's on the way. Its author remains added to it. The author is an afterthought to the poem. But doesn't the poem therefore already at its inception stand in the encounter, in the mystery of the encounter through the author, but then always also through the reader, the other? I'm going to turn the page. There's that section. And then at the end, towards the end of the Meridian speech from 1961, he calls for attentiveness and attention. And notice that it's not the reader paying attention to the poem, the attention that the poem tries to pay to everything it encounters. The poem is the actor here. The poem is the one that's going out and finding readers. And I love this line in English: attention is the natural prayer of the soul. Let me see if I can find this in German. Maybe I can't right yet. Let me see. No, that would take too long for now. But the natural prayer, and that's related to this, the idea to pray, the beten, the prayer, bete, Herr. When here, the natural prayer of the soul is attentiveness or being aware. There's the poem. I'm going to leave you with that. I don't know, Harvey, how helpful or this is for, what in my growing up would have been called the sermon. Not a sermon. But I think in the context of understanding how the challenges of representing trauma through art in language, that Paul Celan is a primary case, a primary example. So thanks. I hope this is engaging. You can email me anytime if you want more Celan or book recommendations or some poems. You can look him up on poetry.org and find some Celan poems for sure. He's an important voice, and I wish you the good luck to have one of his poems seek you out and find you.
Thank you, Scott, for your inspiring message. We're very grateful for your words today. Now, let us enjoy a musical interlude from our own Mike Halecki.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. This is a song of mine called Spirit. Let your spirit fill the air. Make a wish or say a prayer, but save tomorrow. Today you shall appear. Let your spirit fill the air. It's so far and it's so wide, the endless journey from the inside. Hey, save the sorrow, the road ahead is clear. Let your spirit fill the air. Try to hold on as the days unwind. Summer wonders turn to fall. Slow the wheels a little, you may find there's still time to have it all. We are here and we are gone. See the waves roll on and on. Some may whisper, some may shout. Watch the waves roll in and out. Can I borrow all your love while you are here? Let your spirit fill the air. Let your spirit fill the air. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Mike, for that lovely interlude. And thank you, Scott, again, for your guidance and wisdom this morning. We are very grateful for your message. And now for a few announcements. First, I'd like you to hear from our president, Nicole Gantz.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. If you read our newsletter this week, you'll know that we have an opportunity to get involved in Reclaim Our Vote's postcard campaign. Reclaim Our Vote is a nonpartisan outreach campaign, and their mission is to empower underrepresented voters and fight voter suppression. In conjunction with our partner, UU Forward Together, we'll be handwriting postcards to voters who have been deregistered in voter suppression states. These voters are often people of color living in rural areas who are likely unaware that they have been deregistered. By writing these postcards, we'll be alerting them to their deregistered status and providing them information on how they can get registered. We already have a few volunteers, which is great. If you've already reached out to me, just sit tight while I get a head count on how many volunteers we have. Once I have an idea of how many people will be writing postcards, I will reach out to our UU Forward Together liaison, Lisa Garcia Sampson, who will be then purchasing all of the necessary items in order for us to participate. You will not have to purchase anything on your own. Once I have the materials, I will distribute them to the volunteers. For more information about the campaign, please refer to the video link in our newsletter this week. If you can't find the link, email me at president@uulakenorman.org. Similarly, if you'd like to volunteer, email me at that address and I will add you to the list. I think this is an excellent opportunity to not only kick off our partnership with UU Forward Together, but also to be a part of a vital social justice campaign. So a big thank you to all those planning to volunteer. It's opportunities like these that allow us to truly live our beliefs through works.
If you are a visitor, welcome. We are so pleased you joined our virtual service. If you like what you've heard so far and are wondering how to stay connected or get involved with our congregation, please reach out to our membership chair, Linda. Her email address can be found at the bottom of the screen. On another note, and an important note, the search committee and the board have identified a candidate to be minister of our congregation. You might be familiar with him, and I mentioned him in the newsletter. His name is Pat Joby. He's already done a few sermons for us. But more important, he's shown that he's the kind of minister who likes to be involved in the community and can be very helpful building a congregation. Under normal circumstances, we would have meetings with him, in-person meetings with him in the congregation, so you can get to know him, and so the congregation can decide whether they agree with the board that he's a good fit. Obviously, if the congregation doesn't agree that he's a good fit, he ain't. However, we can't do that now. So we've been hosting virtual cocktail parties. The next one is May 8th, which is next Friday. And we're going to invite him to the cocktail party. Many of you couldn't come on Friday nights or didn't come on Friday nights. We'll also host one the following Thursday, that's the 14th, to give as many of you as possible a chance to meet Pat Joby by being able to ask him questions so you can get familiar with his background and the kind of minister he might be for us. I'll see you there. If you're at all interested in the future of the congregation, you should make it your business to attend one of those. And if you can't, but you want to, let me know and I'll see if I can arrange another time. For our members, we appreciate your keeping current on your pledges, so we will be ready to resume full speed when life returns to normal. For a closing word, I'd like to read a very dark poem. This is the one that Scott mentioned to prove that poetry wasn't over. This is an unusual poem written by Paul Celan because instead of praising the Lord, he's asking the Lord to hear us. Here it goes. It's called Tenebrae. We are near, Lord, near and at hand. Handled already, Lord, clawed and crawling as though the body of each of us were your body, Lord. Pray, Lord, pray to us. We are near. Wind or I, we went there to bend over hollow and ditch. To be watered, we went there, Lord. It was blood, it was what you shed, Lord. It gleamed. It cast your image into our eyes, Lord. Our eyes and our mouths are open and empty, Lord. We have drunk, Lord, the blood and the image that was in the blood, Lord. Pray, Lord, we are near. now going to blow out the chalice. Blessed be, and I wish you all a happy week, a meaningful week, and I will see you at the cocktail party one Friday. Thank you.